Rolling along here on Motorsports Today, Kalegi, Adam Tropper here with you. Well, our next guest is someone who's synonymous with the NASCAR community, both behind the wheel and behind the microphone. He competes full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, driving the number 48 Chevrolet for Big Machine Racing, and he also works as a pit reporter for NASCAR on NBC. Parker Kligerman, thanks for joining us here on Motorsports Today. We really appreciate the time.
Sure thing, guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's that's only two of the jobs. You're the podcast, Bunny Lap media company now, and whatever else I can fit in. Probably some of the extra days I hopefully can find each week. Yeah, we try to fit that in. Oh, and also we race trucks. So we do. There's a lot going on. But yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I know you're a busy guy, but, from February to November, you're always on the road. We caught you kind of right smack in the middle of the NASCAR offseason. I know you're at the shop right now. So take us through what the offseason is like from the perspective of a full-time NASCAR driver and NASCAR media member.
Yeah, so there's not a lot required from you in the offseason. This is one of the first off seasons I've ever had where I knew I had to ride so early. So for normally you're dialing for dollars and trying to make things happen and get together and negotiating and it's a tense time. But for the first time in my life, I'm in the incredible position to know that, I'm going to be continuing the team I'm at, building on what we did this year. So that really frees up a lot of mind share and time. And so one of the biggest things I've been doing this all season is, myself and Landon Castle launched a podcast back in May that's grown into a little bit of like a motorsports media sort of thing. Our mantra is the cool stuff in motorsports. We try to sort of dive into all motorsports and sort of promote it and tell cool stories and explore our curiosities around it. And so we've been doing a live show for the last 5 weeks. And that has been a really cool thing. And our purpose in doing it was that all these, unlike your podcast did not stop, but a lot of the podcasts out there did, stop at the end of the season. We talk all racing. So of course, F1 went a little further. We wanted to do something to make a bigger splash. And so we went live, and that has been a huge undertaking because we've had about 3 to 4 guests on every live episode each Wednesday for 3 hours talking motorsports. And so that's taken a lot of my time. So other than that, I've been up in Connecticut. This is the first time I've been to the shop since before Phoenix. So I've been out of North Carolina for a while. But it's good to see everyone. We had our Christmas dinner last night with the team. Was able to give them all a gift today. And yeah, I probably won't be back down here until January. So you caught me the one day in all 2 months I'm down here.
Well, still awesome to hear that you're able to have some time to yourself during the off season. But with that being said, so backtracking a little bit in your career and really your entire life, what I'm curious about is obviously we're all from the Northeast. I'm from New York. Eddie's right here from New Jersey. You Connecticut. So where did that passion for racing first come, and also how what was different, I guess, between you and versus other drivers who grew up, say, in the Charlotte area? What do you think you had to do differently to make it to where you are?
Man, my story is odd and in a more endearing way, unique. In that, yeah, Connecticut's not a NASCAR hotbed. Now, although hilariously enough, you've got Joe Logano, Priest, myself, Alfredo. We're all from Connecticut. Logano, obviously a 2-time champ. Priest, a cup driver for multiple years. It's like I'm not sure how that happened, but it's funny because, so to go backwards a little bit, I found racing because I was always into cars as a kid, and I had model cars. I just loved cars. And it was a bit of a joke that I came out of the womb with a model car. And then we got cable when I was 9 years old. This is 1999. To you guys, it's going to sound like a million years ago. I'm only 33. Trust me, that sounds old to you guys, but it's not old. But we got cable, and I saw Speed Vision, which then became Speed Channel. And I'm sure you've maybe seen a little bit of that, although we were just reminiscing that it basically went away in 2013, which was 10 years ago. Blows my mind.
Crazy stuff.
Crazy, but Speed, I saw racing on there, and I actually saw Formula One for the first time. And immediately I pointed at it and said, I want to do that. What is that? And that led me down the path of exploring motorsports, and from F1 to IndyCar to NASCAR. I watched and consumed all of it. And a couple of years later, we were moving towns, and my parents were gracious enough to investigate going go-kart racing. There was a local karting association in Norwalk, Connecticut, in a parking lot by a beach where they'd set up like a makeshift track. It's still going on to this day. And I started racing there, and worked my way to cars. And then I really wanted to go to Formula One. I did an open wheel season. My first races I did were Skip Barber at Lime Rock. I won my first 2 races, and I did an open wheel season, what was called Fuma TR on the West Coast in California. I actually raced against Alexander Rossi. So he and I were
really
in the same series together. I won he didn't do all the races, but I won the championship, won the most races that year. He won a couple of the ones I didn't win. So we were a bit of sparring partners. But after that, I didn't have the funding to go to Europe. It wasn't possible. So my dad, actually, interesting enough, he wasn't the biggest racing fan, was like, why don't you go to NASCAR? And it was booming at the time. And I watched it. I loved NASCAR. I just didn't particularly want to go that direction. I wanted to go to Formula One. And within the span of like a year, I ended up with a deal at Penske and the rest, and worked my way up here. But I think, my love of it and my path from Connecticut, Connecticut played an early role for sure. But from that period on, I went to do that open wheel series in California to the next deal. The first thing I did in ovals was USAC midgets in Indiana. I did that for 2 seasons, and then I went to ARCA after I got my deal with Penske. So I don't have like that short track Brian Priest style, local following. I jumped all around because I just had to go where the opportunity was.
And that's still really awesome that you were able to make it to where you were after all those different series. But now to transition more into what you're doing today. Obviously, you're a broadcaster on NBC, pit road analyst. So what led you to that path of wanting to do TV as well on top of your driving?
So I fell into it entirely by accident. I actually like to say I failed my way into it, but that's a bit of an inside joke. Basically, the end of 2013, I was racing full-time for Kyle Busch Motorsports in Xfinity, my last full-time season before this year. And I had done my first 2 cup starts, and they were like the best debut of anyone that year. Kyle Larson had debuted. A couple other great drivers had debuted, and I had like the best finish, 18th with a 30th place cup team. Then we went to Homestead, Miami, had a great finish there as well. But around that time, NASCAR came to me and said, hey, there's this car website that we think because you tweeted about it, called Jalopnik, and they're interested in having a driver write a column. Well, the initial driver they tried for said no. I was the second choice. I said yes. I started writing for them, and as I went into 2014, I continued that, going to Cup. The team I was at, Swan, ended up folding for financial reasons, but I kept doing the Jalopnik stuff, and I'd done some YouTube stuff. Well, there was a young producer by the name of Chris Taylor at NBC who was reading my columns and seeing my YouTube stuff. And as NBC was taking over the TV contract end of 2014 into 2015, they gave me a call and just said, hey, would you be interested in doing some TV? And I was like, well, not really, no. But where are you guys at? And I was like, I want to drive. And they said, we're in Stamford, Connecticut. And I was like, wait, that's where I'm from. I'll come home. And so came back, thought I'd do it for a little bit. And next thing I knew, I was doing it for 9 years. And I can't take credit for getting to pit reporting. That was Jeff Banke, the guy who called me. He's the head of motorsports at NBC Sports. He had the very innovative thought process of saying, let's put a driver on the ground who can talk to other drivers about driving. Sounds kind of rudimentary, but it was very innovative at the time. And, it worked. And, I'm very grateful that he thought of that and thought I was the guy to do it. But it definitely, it grew faster and did something bigger than I thought initially by far. And, I was able to balance a bit of racing in there too, because they were so cool about me racing, and it's all kind of worked out, I think, in the best way possible.
Yeah, and Parker, I want to explore that a little further. One of the most interesting things with you is now you multitask, especially this past year. You're racing every Xfinity race, and then you're on pit road for the Cup races for NBC. So how have you been able to strike that balance? And do you think there's any sort of added perspective that maybe you bring as a pit reporter, being a driver at the same time, and kind of maybe being able to go in understanding from the driver's perspective and being in their shoes sometimes when they're frustrated after a heated moment or excited after a win?
So I'll answer that in 2 ways. First and foremost, I get asked that all the time about balancing the two and how they sort of help each other. And I do believe they help each other. I think, the TV side has always benefited from the driving that I do. In that, I always think if there's just one thing I can pull from doing a race, maybe whether it's a truck race that weekend or obviously now racing full time in Xfinity, if I can pull, or even back in 2019, I was doing cup races sporadically, but, was during NBC's time. So I'd have to take a weekend off. If I could pull something from that and provide it to the viewers and they get value out of it, then it was worth it. Right. For NBC, for myself, wherever. I always think there was value in that. And that's always helped. I think vice versa. The driving side, I've become a better driver than I was 10 years ago, partly because of TV, because it gave me a different perspective. It made me think about the sport in an entirely different way and view it from a entirely different perspective. So it's always helped my driving. As for what I get out of, what the drivers think about me asking them questions, that sort of thing, pretty early on, I discovered something, and I've already said it here once, but I have to emphasize this to people because it sounds really dumb. But one of the things I realized when I first got into pit reporting was that very seldom do we as drivers get asked about driving. And I know that sounds dumb, but unlike other sports, it's very unusual that there's someone on the other side who actually knows what it's like to drive a race car and what goes into that and the intricacies of that. It's not like just driving a road car. Well, when football players get asked questions, the person asking the question has probably thrown a football before. That's a pretty common thing you do at some point in your life. Or if you kick a soccer ball and you're asking soccer ball questions, you have a pretty good understanding of how good they are at it. Driving is really complex, and no one ever asked about driving. So when I got into the role of pit reporting, I just would ask about driving. And sure enough, certain drivers would light up about that, or find something that they maybe give some information that they wouldn't normally give out, because you unlock that side of their brain that they want to talk about their craft, right? They want to talk about the thing they do really well and not talk about things that aren't involved in that craft. And then lastly, as I said, I found racing on TV, and it was my one connection to racing. And so whenever I've done TV or any content in racing, my big thing is to focus on what would 9-year-old me wanted to have seen at, on TV be asked. And I know if 9-year-old me wanted that, then it's probably the right path.
That's awesome. Truly a full circle moment there, it feels like. But
yeah.
In terms of like your lifestyle and your schedule now, like you said, this is your first full-time ride in a couple of years. So granted, this offseason has probably been pretty short for you, but what's the adjustment just between TV, full-time racing, everything? Like what are the differences like just in your daily life, your schedule, everything that's been going on this year?
It totally flipped my life upside down. My busiest year of my life was 2019. I raced part-time trucks, part-time cup, full-time pit reporter. I had a TV show called Proving Grounds, which was a car show that was awesome for NBC Sports. I was doing a bunch of ancillary content around cars all over the place. And that year I did over like 125 flights, but I didn't have to leave Connecticut. This year was the toughest of my life because, in taking on a 33 race schedule and being the sole driver of this organization, and trying to be a part of building this organization from it's a young team and a young organization. I had to be fully immersed. I had to be all in. And that's one thing Scott asked me to do, my owner, Scott Borchetta. And so that meant coming to North Carolina. Now, my girlfriend works at NBC and she couldn't leave Connecticut and everything. So we kept our place in Connecticut and kept our life up there. But it meant me just having like a whole double life in another city. And that has been the most expensive year of my life. One of the toughest for sure. I think from January to the end of the season, I had been home to Connecticut like 20 days in total. So if I wasn't in a hotel, I was in my little apartment here that felt like a hotel, or it looks more like a hostel or something at some point. It's just a bed. It was just a bed and nothing else in it. And I think it's definitely a first world problem to say you had two places and the problems of two places. But until you experience that, it is a lot. And so, but I'm glad I did it because I believe some of the success we had this year was because I went all in and got immersed. And I think, I now know how to balance the time a little better. That maybe this coming season, there's a little bit more wiggle room for me to be smarter with my time and maybe spend a little bit more time in Connecticut. But also, I think, I just think in this game, like you gotta go all in. You gotta be willing to dive in and go after it, because you've got competitors that are working just as hard to beat you.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I also gotta say, like, I follow you on Instagram and I see the got that upgrade thing. You post like every week. So just say I could definitely imagine how many flights you've had to take.
I've got a flight later today. I already got that upgrade, so you'll see it post.
News is breaking here. So Parker, it's crazy to think that this February is actually a decade since you attempted the Daytona 500, made it into the field with Swan. And, we've spoken to a few drivers on this show before, never one that's been upside down in a cup car though. So I want to get your perspective of what that wreck was like in Daytona practice, because I remember you had a big slide along the infield.
That wreck is it's so funny because it's lived on in infamy past me from remembering that race. And Proving Grounds, that TV show I did, they would play it almost every episode because they thought it was hilarious, obviously because we were okay and everything. But the the experience there was even more to it, because just before it happened, down the backstretch, I came on the radio. I remember Swan was a young team. They'd gone to 2 cars. There was a lot of turmoil behind the scenes, but we had good success together. And so I came on the radio though, and I said, hey, this car is awesome. We're done. We're not practicing anymore. That was down the backstretch. From that point through 3 and 4, I was trying to get out of the pack, but I was stuck in the pack a little bit because I think someone had popped high and tried to make a pass. And so I couldn't get out. So I was going to wait a lap and then try and get out of the pack down the backstretch and quit. As I said that, we go through 3 and 4. We come on the front stretch. I think it was Menard and Kenseth get together or something. Next thing I know, I'm looking at the sky, grabbing my belts, and realizing I'm going in the fence. And it got very quiet. So it just it goes silent. Then I hit the fence. And I remember thinking oh no, because the year prior at the Daytona Xfinity race, I was right underneath Larson when he went in the fence at the finish of that race. And I actually finished top 5. I thought I won that race for a second because I couldn't see anything, but turns out there was just a couple cars in front of us. But nonetheless, I watched that and I saw how violent it was. So in my mind, as I'm going up in the air, I'm like, all right, this is going to be big and you're about to rip apart on this fence. But as I got up there, for every reason, it didn't hit hard, didn't grab that hard. And as it flipped over, it was actually the most gentle, falling over there was. But when I was upside down for that whole time, then you're thinking, okay, don't hit me, because now you're up in the belts and you're so uncomfortable in such an uncomfortable position. And I then was really pissed. And I remember punching the air because I was like, damn it, why did this happen? We had a great car and this thing's destroyed now. And then I looked down and I realized there was a pool of oil beneath my head. And I was like, well, that's not good, because if this thing lights on fire, I have no way out of it. And then eventually they came over and flipped me over and it was all fine. But I should mention, honorable mention to Ryan Truex, who ran up, and I didn't even remember this. He had run up and asked me if I was okay. And I was so angry, I kind of brushed him off, but shout out to him for checking in on me. Good friend.
Yeah, well, thankfully you were okay from that. And I gotta say, from being upside down in a practice session, that's a complete 180 to the National Series wins that you've had in NASCAR. You've had 3 of them now, which most recently, obviously, Mid-Ohio last season. Is there any of those 3 that you would say was most impactful or your favorite one? And then on top of that, outside of your wins, what have been your favorite races or tracks that you've participated in NASCAR?
So first of all, Mid-Ohio was probably the most impactful win of my life. It was such an accession to that point from end of 2019 and early 2020 when I thought I was basically done driving. And then when the Hendersons refired up their program, from the day we started at Pocono in 2020 to that point at Mid-Ohio, we just had a linear upward trajectory of performance. And I think by the time I win that race at Mid-Ohio last year, I was the best driver I'd been my whole career. I think it obviously it then led to me having this opportunity at Big Machine, because I was trying to get an opportunity here, wasn't maybe breaking through, and then we won that race and they offered me Talladega that day. That went well, and it parlayed into being here in 2023, which was awesome. I think in terms of races that I found just really cool though, Motorsport was one of the coolest events. I got to do that in 2017. That was super cool. Not to just be a Canada guy, but Montreal was one of the coolest races I've ever done my whole life. I'd seen Formula One there for the first time in person in 2003 or 2004. And so it was near and dear to my heart. And to get to race there and know that it was an F1 track was just so cool. And the crowd was insane. And both those Canadian races, I can't wait till the day Cup goes to Canada, because I think they'll get about 250,000 people, because the crowds there are unbelievable for those races. And then I think my first Cup start in 2013 at Texas was a really big moment for me. I don't think anyone else cared, and that was pretty evident because the broadcast never showed me or no one talked about it. But it was a huge debut with a team that was outside the top 30 in points. Qualified their best qualifying position, got them their best finish ever outside like a super speedway. And we did it on straight pace. There was no wrecks in that race. It was a 500 miler at Old Texas. We went 2 laps down and finished 18th, but at the end of that race, we're absolutely flying. And I executed. That day was one of the best drives I ever had in my entire life, because from practice to qualifying to every lap of that 500-mile race, pit stops, whatever, I mean, I never made a mistake. The team never did, but I mean, I felt like it was a Cup level performance from a 23-year-old, right? And to this day, I still remember that fondly, because it was such a validation of making it to the top. I had worked my whole life to get there, and I performed at a really, really, it's, I think it's similar maybe to an NFL quarterback gets his shot in the NFL late in the season, has a great game, wins the game. Like, to me, that's what that felt like. Maybe for a team that's fallen out of the playoffs or ever fallen off playoff contention, to have like an excellent performance. I wish it, I thought at the time it would have parlayed in more calls and opportunities, which it never did. Probably was a sign. But nonetheless, that was a really, really big day for me. I don't ever talk about that one much, but it was such a cool moment. And it just, I could think about it often when I think about like moments that matter a lot to me in my career. That one was big.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, a Cup debut is certainly something special, and definitely should be celebrated. Now, one more race that I think comes on my radar when I think about it, especially maybe it was because on the NBC broadcast this year, you said that you would jump in Buckingham Fountain if you won Chicago. I was just thinking that Chicago was a big race. So I guess that leads to 2 things for me. One, did you think if you win the Chicago Street Race next year, did you figure out your backup plan if you can't jump in the fountain?
Yeah. So first of all, I did that hit about that on NBC for the Nashville race, and immediately was informed that you would be, if I had jumped in the fountain, I would be spending the next hit in jail. So that became pretty evident that was not going to be allowed. You know what? That is one point I should have, and I was thinking that race when you first brought it up as like big moments in NASCAR. I think that was probably the most important race in just over 20 years for NASCAR. For a lot of reasons. Obviously, you saw the fanfare around it, the TV ratings around it, but it proved that NASCAR could do something different, innovative, and gather and grab a different audience than it's historically had for the last 2 decades. And it was such a cool atmosphere. That Saturday, before all the weather issues, that Saturday, I have never in my life seen that young of a crowd at a NASCAR race. I even said young and attractive, because it's just like it was a concert. It was a festival crowd that happened to come to a NASCAR race. And I thought that was super cool. So, but they weren't they were race fans. I so many people wearing team merch that were stopping me. I even made a joke to my PR guy, and he made this joke: "Is this what it's like to be Dale Jr.?" I was like, I think I found my audience, because I'd never been stopped that many times at a NASCAR race. I never had such a big crowd at appearances. It was such a cool event, and it was such a shame what happened on Sunday in terms of the weather, because I think that could have continued, but it was definitely one of the most important events in NASCAR history. And I would love to win there. And if I win there, we'll find some body of water to jump in, or I've made the joke, we'll just go drink some Big Machine vodka shots at the bars right off the other side of the backstretch. And that will be a cool way to celebrate in the full race suit the whole time.
That is a vibe.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Cannot argue with that.
I'm going to the bars. If you just know, if I win this next year, I'm going directly to the bar in my race suit. So
Cannot wait to see that. But another reason I mentioned Chicago, and you mentioned the young and hopefully attractive audience. I was there. That was my first ever race at Chicago. And I have a picture on Michigan Avenue right after the Xfinity race. I was one of those people that stopped you.
No way! Oh, that's so funny, dude. So that's so funny because I was telling people. Wait, so there I'm in my Big Machine shirt.
Yeah.
But on that same weekend, I was walking in just regular street clothes and got stopped like 3 or 4 times in the middle of the street. And I was like, this has never happened to me ever. So yeah, no, you were right there in that crowd, young and attractive, as we like to say. And yeah, you're welcome. And it just, man, that event, the atmosphere was so cool. I've even texted Ben Kennedy since and just been like, dude, what you guys pulled off of that was so cool. And I can't wait till go back there because it's, I hope they can have the weather they deserve because with the concerts and everything and the race that puts on, the cars have put on there, I just think such a cool event and such a big thing for NASCAR. And I can't wait to see where they take that idea and that sort of stuff going forward.
Yeah, and we saw the shots of the fans that like maybe didn't even know much about NASCAR. They're looking over, they're like, what's going on in the park? So it was fantastic.
Yeah, nothing short of
to that point.
Yes.
To that point. So during the Xfinity race, we had some early cautions. What was crazy to me is as that race went on, as we got to halfway, closer to halfway, we didn't get to halfway. The crowd on the fences kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you could see it. And we'd have a caution 5 laps later, and bam, there's more people. And I was like, this is insane. This feels like an F1 race from the 80s. Like you see those pictures and videos of people hanging off the rafters and on things, and like they just want to see the cars. I was like, this is the coolest NASCAR race I've ever been to. So definitely awesome.
Yeah, I saw that from my perspective too. On Saturday, I was actually sitting in the stretch between turns 11 and 12, I believe, where the McDonald's sponsorship was right across from Michigan Avenue. And I saw some of those people climbing up the fence. It was hilarious.
Oh, so cool. So
yeah.
cool.
An incredible event, but I had to shout that out considering that you were one of the people I met right on Michigan Avenue of all places.
You were one of the people that added to my enthusiasm around the event and my sudden realization that that's probably the majority of my Instagram audience. So
feelings mutual.
Yep.
So Parker, we'll finish with this. This has been a great conversation. So 2023, a big year for you guys, Big Machine Racing. You make it to the Xfinity Series playoffs, some great runs along the way. You re-up the deal. You got the second full season coming up in 2024. What's made the partnership click, and what are the goals coming into this 2024 season?
I think for us here, it's been a cool place to be a part of because I don't like to say like some people like to say small team, that sort of thing. No, I like to say we're a young race team, and it's been cool to see this race team improve the processes, improve ourselves as a race team and the things we do and learning about how to set up the cars and that sort of stuff. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but it really is important because when you get to the pointy end of the Xfinity Series field, those top 14 to 16 cars are all pretty close in equipment, right? And it comes down to the people and the drivers that make a big difference, and your processes and how you can take really good runs and do that 10 weeks in a row, right? And the only way you can do that, because we have so many cars and so many different tracks and how diverse the schedule is to have really good processes and have really good systems for how you go about your weekends and how you go about sim and all those things. And we had to set all that up. So it's a pretty cool thing to have been a part of, to see where we were when I came here in February earlier this year to where we were when we were in the playoffs, and how as a team we were clicking. I mean, we didn't have to speak about half things because we could just run on autopilot and know we were going to be a threat to be a top 5 car and possibly, be a chance to win. So that to me was so exciting to be a part of. And so into 2024, really, if we just build on what we were doing, and we, like Patrick Donahue and myself like to say this, just keep doing what we were doing and just tweak a little bit here and there as we learn things, it's like we're firing off 5 or 7 positions better than we did in the beginning of the season, which to me puts us in the territory to be a top 5 car all year. So if we can do that, that's a huge deal. But first and foremost, we've got to win a race. We basically checked every damn box there is, but winning a race. And so my number one goal in 2024 is to win a race, to finally win the Xfinity Series race, which I've been trying to do for more than a decade. And when we do that, I think the floodgates open for our race team, and we can go out there and do it far more often and go contend for this championship.